Really?
Okay,
Yeah.
let's get started.
Yeah.
This meeting is now called to order. So welcome to our November board meeting and a special welcome to you, Dr. Shipley. You are participating in your first board meeting here. First board meeting here at MSU. I know you've been busy during the last 3 months, and we appreciate your keeping us up to date on your activities. We look forward to hearing from you further during the meeting. We will hear from you further during the meeting, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Bryant could not participate in the meeting today because he's traveling. Mrs. Burks, will you serve as acting secretary today and tomorrow in King's Place?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. Bad timing?
Good.
Ms. Gaynor, please introduce our visitors.
Absolutely. Good afternoon. I will start in our usual spot with Barry Maka, our general counsel. Next to him is Kyle Owen, our associate vice president for facility services. We have some VPs over here, Dr. Robert Clark, Dr. Howard Farrell, Dr. Marilyn Foley. We have Chris Stovall, who is our controller. Special guest, Rich Boyer with Modern Think. Back here in this corner, we have Lana Sweeten-Schultz, reporter with the Times Record News. We also have with us Mark Campbell and Jessica Bruno from Channel 3. Dr. David Carlson is the chair of the Faculty Senate. We have Vice President Keith Lamb, Provost Dr. Betty Stewart. We have with us also Andrea Mendoza. She is the Student Government Association Observer today. Jesse Brown is president of the Student Government Association. Is that right? And we have Charlie Carr, athletic director. Dr. Matt Clark, who is associate vice president. Mr. Matt Clark, close. And Mr. Matt Clark, who's associate vice president for student affairs. Mark McClendon, who's director of institutional research. And back in this corner, we have Reagan Foster, who is chair of the Staff Senate, Don Fisher is director of human resources, and Cindy Ashlock, executive assistant to the president.
Thank you. Just a reminder, this meeting is streamed live on the internet. And again, I ask you that everyone silence or turn off your cell phones. The chair at the end of the table is for those who will make presentations or answer questions during the meeting. Please sit or stand there, as this will help in the video and audio transmission. And Cindy, would you do me a favor? If they don't do that, will you take charge of getting on them? Okay, thank you.
Oh.
Okay. In addition, we're trying out a new microphone system, and it is difficult for our audience to hear when individuals answer questions from outside the boardroom. Is that good?
That's it. That's
Spaceship.
the spaceship. It's going to be great.
We provide an opportunity for public comment concerning agenda items at the beginning of each meeting. No one has signed up, and we will move on. Item 1601, discussion of higher education issues. Presidential Transition Survey. During the last several meetings, we've included an item to discuss current issues and trends in higher education. Today, this item includes a report from Presidential Transition Survey that was accomplished shortly after Dr. Shipley arrived in Wichita Falls. And as you can see in the agenda, we had 80% faculty and staff participation, which, by the way, if you guys aren't familiar with surveys, that's pretty impressive. 80% participation is really nice. We also have a special guest today who will present a summary and interpretation of the survey findings. Dr. Shipley, please introduce our guest.
I'm so happy to introduce Rich Boyer. He's going to present the results of this survey that he and I talked about 6 to 7 months ago as I made my transition. He is the CEO of Modern Think, and Modern Think partners with the Great Colleges to Workforce Survey in the Chronicle of Higher Education. So if you read the newspaper, the Chronicle of Higher Ed, you've seen his work. He has a bachelor's of science degree in business from the McIntire School of Commerce at the University of Virginia, where his two areas of focus were management information systems and marketing. And unfortunately, he won't be here this weekend because he's a soccer enthusiast who follows international and domestic tournaments with great interest, and he could see our number 2 ranked wonderful men's soccer team. And for service projects, Rich has trained a guide dog for a nonprofit organization to serve the visually challenged. He's bilingual, speaking English and Spanish. So welcome, Rich.
Thank you, Dr. Shipley. I want to make sure I start off on the right foot, Mr. Chairman. Am I okay at the podium, or do I need to move
You
over
are
here?
fine and dandy right where you're at. If Cindy gets out of hand,
Then you need to worry.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the introduction, Dr. Shipley. I'm here to share the high-level summary results from the presidential survey we did. As Dr. Shipley mentioned, a firm that I work with and a partner at Modern Think conduct surveys of this nature for colleges and universities across the country. We have a partnership with the Chronicle of Higher Education where we do the research for the annual Great Colleges to Work For program, a program loosely modeled after Fortune Magazine's 100 Best Companies to Work For, but specifically for colleges and universities. To date, we've surveyed over 1,000 colleges and universities with a survey instrument very similar to what we administered here most recently. So we've got some good benchmarking capabilities. To the extent that trends and news in higher ed is on the agenda, I think we can speak to that as well as we get some of these survey results. One of the things I can share with you is we've been doing this project since 2007, and when we look at what's happening in higher ed versus other industries and sectors, I would share with you that higher ed is a little late to the party when it comes to being intentional and strategic about issues related to workplace quality, organization culture, and faculty staff engagement. We are seeing much more strategic application of this kind of data, whereas historically a lot of these surveys have simply been administered to see how satisfied or engaged faculty staff are. We're seeing increasingly them used for things like strategic planning processes, as a data collection process to help inform the strategic planning process. Increasingly, we are being asked to come to the table to administer surveys like this at leadership transition. Sometimes that comes at the request of a board, other times it comes at the request of an incoming leader to help establish a baseline in terms of their stewardship of the culture moving forward. Other times at the request of the board, it sometimes comes as a means to identify a metric which boards can hold leadership teams accountable to in terms of their, not just their financial stewardship, but the stewardship of the culture and the engagement levels of faculty and staff. So surveys of this nature are increasingly part of listening tours. That is a common practice for new presidents, new chancellors, rather than just doing kind of anecdotal, qualitative data collection methods. We're seeing more use of this kind of survey. This survey instrument is a derivative of the survey instrument we use in the annual Great Colleges to Work For program. We've shortened it, but it gives us some key insight into some of the factors and dynamics that we know are important in terms of their influence they have on faculty and staff engagement levels. Just very briefly, there were 26 core statements. Chairman spoke to the strong response rate. I'll provide some additional context to that. Higher ed and healthcare are the two sectors where we generally see lower response rates on surveys of this nature. In the Great Colleges to Work For program, we generally see response rates between 38 and 46%, depending on the size of the institution, as well as the Carnegie classification. When we're surveying outside of the context of that program, such as we did here at Midwestern State University, we can do things to help increase the response rates, number of reminders, formal communication program. So it's not uncommon to see higher response rates. Nonetheless, an 80% response rate on a survey of this nature, particularly given the university doesn't have a long history of doing surveys like this, is outstanding. It shows a couple things for us. One, it allows us to operate at a high level, high confidence level that the data is in fact reflective of the population as a whole. So when we look at the margins of error on this, they're very, very small. It also kind of tells us that faculty and staff very much care about having their voice heard. And one of the things that we see in this survey is that faculty and staff are eager for a different level of communication. More communication from and with senior leadership, more communication from and with their colleagues, particularly cross-functionally, and more what we often characterize as appropriate transparency. So they want to see what's going on, see how the sausage is made, if you will, and want to be included, involved in those conversations and those decisions that have ultimate impact on them. So excellent response rate here. Gives us, again, integrity of the data is strong, and faculty and staff are invested to take the time to complete the survey. Talk a little bit about benchmark. I think at this point in the process, given that we don't have a long history, we've not administered a survey like this every 2 years, every 3 years, every 5 years here at Midwestern State University. So we are establishing a new baseline moving forward against which we can compare ourselves in the future. I think it is important to have some context. You know, how does the health and quality of this culture compare to other colleges and universities today? And while I don't want to focus exclusively on external metrics, because I think first and foremost, it's important to have a good handle on the state of your culture internally. What are your particular strengths? Where are the opportunities? One of the things that I can share with you that we're learning as a function of this research there are some things that I would characterize as differentiating qualities of great workplaces. These are things that we see over and over at these best workplaces, whether it be in higher ed or elsewhere. And one of those is the perception of a special or unique culture. So I can almost guarantee you, prior to my work at Modern Tech, I worked at the Great Place to Work Institute, which does the research for that Fortune Magazine's 100 Best Companies to Work For. I can tell you that if I were to do a focus group of a subset of employees from any one of those firms, or even the honor roll schools in the Great Colleges to Work For program, the honor roll schools are those institutions that have been recognized the most number of times in the program. Then we hear things over and over around, we may be a liberal arts college, a small liberal arts college, but we're different than other small liberal arts colleges when we're talking about those that are, again, ultimately recognized as being great workplaces. So the perception of a special and unique culture is important. One reason I focus on that now is I suspect from what I see in the survey results and some of what I've heard of the preliminary plans around the strategic plan, the new strategic plan, there will be an additional focus or increased focus on external branding, right? Branding in the Wichita Falls community, branding in the larger Texas community. Certainly that's an important component, and we have seen more branding efforts in higher ed, particularly those related to student recruitment. What we are starting to see more of in higher ed is more intentional focus on the internal branding. Right? So this is many institutions or many organizations or sectors have been much more diligent about this than what we see in higher ed. Kind of your employment contract, your employment brand, those things that make you special and unique as an employer. So to the extent you're focusing on external branding, I think it also makes sense to look at internal branding, particularly as it relates to your ability to attract and retain the kind of faculty and staff you want to take this institution to the next level. Benchmarks. So the honor roll is a term I've just referenced here. So in the Great Colleges to Work For program, there are 12 recognition categories that a participating institution could be recognized in. Things like confidence in senior leadership, confidence in the experience of shared governance. Those institutions that are recognized in the most number of categories achieve the honor roll categorization. We do kind of disaggregate that data by institution size, small, medium, and large, based on enrollment size, so that we're doing a more kind of traditional apples-to-apples comparisons. So that's the honor roll benchmark. There are two other benchmarks we've included. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on them, but the Carnegie's classification. So we're looking at institutions that share a single Carnegie classification to Midwestern State. There's no best in class there. That's just all of those institutions that share the Carnegie Master's classification. And then we have created a peer benchmark, which is in aggregate some total of data. We have institutions in our database that are on some of the aspirational peer lists that you've provided us. So for external comparison, that provides some benchmark. We ask the 26 belief statements. So on those belief statements, we ask people to respond to or with a 5-point agreement scale. Strongly agree and agree being the most favorable. At this early phase of our analysis, we'll do an abbreviated top box analysis. We combine the agreements, the strongly agree and agree, characterize that as a positive response. On the other end of the response continuum, we'll do the same with the strongly disagree and disagree. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we see findings from individual statements. We also asked a couple open-ended questions to which we collected those responses verbatim. Board members were part of that process. I suspect some of you may remember that. In addition to board members, we also solicited input from donors, alumni, and community members. I'm going to start with this slide, and this arguably is the most important slide in the deck. It captures some of what we'll characterize as the key findings or overarching themes. So, as I look at this organization, coming into it from an external perspective, I would characterize that there is a tremendous sense of connection to the mission of Midwestern State University and a tremendous sense of pride. That pride is derived from a couple areas in particular. There's a pride in kind of the unique nature of the liberal arts, the focus on students and life learning, and the role the university plays in the Wichita Falls community. There are other elements that contribute to that, but I would characterize those as the three primary drivers of this tremendous sense of pride. That pride also plays an important role in driving a tremendous sense of community. There's a high degree of what we call camaraderie. I had a chance to do a town hall presentation this morning, and I was truly impressed by just the degree of familiarity and camaraderie that 150 some odd folks kind of demonstrated as they walked into the room prior to the meeting. So the sense of community and the sense of pride is certainly strong. That community, that camaraderie plays out most strongly at the unit, department, or team level, those close immediate work groups. We're not seeing it necessarily extend across the university, and we'll look at some evidence of that here very shortly. So the strong relationship is an excellent foundation, and a next step is for that strong relationship to inform and enhance kind of the degree of cooperation and collaboration that we see across units. Since 2008, resource constraints has been a common issue at most colleges and universities across the country. We are seeing that kind of turn the corner a little bit after the last couple of years of people getting used to the new normal. It is a pain point for many staff today and faculty, particularly as those resource constraints relate to believing that we are staffed up appropriately or that we are compensated appropriately. So staffing and compensation tend to be the acute pain points for resource constraints. When there are issues regarding the resource constraints, sometimes that also influences the sense of faculty and staff feeling appreciated. It also can impact the sense of perceived fairness. How can you expect me to perform at a level that you want if I don't have the resources that I need or I'm not compensated competitively? In terms of communications, this is one of the things we spent a lot of time talking about this morning, and I had a chance to have lunch with the cabinet. We talked about that at length as well. Faculty and staff are eager for a higher degree of dialogue and a greater sense of transparency in terms of the communications here. This is something that, as I've shared with a couple of the other groups, it's, I think, often simple but not easy, and that we all think that we communicate very well. There's lots of, certainly you all have lots of vehicles for sharing messages, whether it be intranets or meeting boards or newsletters. And the kind of communication I think folks are eager for more is real dialogue, right? A sense of feeling like one's voice is heard, that their opinions are solicited, and not only that the voice is heard, but that it actually matters. And we'll again talk about that in more detail as we look at individual statements. There is, for many, a sense of optimism regarding the new administration. And not just regarding a new president, but in regarding to the future of the organization, the institution as a whole, in terms of the ability to expand on its mission, to have a greater impact in Wichita Falls community, and even beyond Wichita Falls. That's not uncommon when there is leadership transition, for us to see that kind of sense of optimism for moving forward. So I think between a new president and a strategic plan that's being revised and adjusted, there are, in some regards, good reasons for folks to feel that sense of optimism moving forward. We will make the deck available for folks afterwards, so you can go through in detail and see some of these in greater sense. So a couple of these slides I'll move through more quickly. I do find it often helpful to include some of the responses to the open-ended questions so you can get a sense of the passion with which employees and faculty are responding. The comments I've selected and included in this deck are reflective of the themes throughout the comment set. So while we only have a few isolated examples, the first comment where you see the sense and the reference to family is not an isolated statement. That speaks to that sense of community and camaraderie that I spoke to. The size of the university is also something I think many of your faculty and staff appreciate in terms of the size, facilitating a greater sense of connectedness. The third quote speaks to that sense of autonomy. This is yet another differentiating quality of great workplaces, and particularly among faculty, it's something they very much value today about their work here at Midwestern State University, having the flexibility and the autonomy they have, the antithesis of being micromanaged, if you will. Some nice findings on that. In terms of the association with COPLAC and the liberal arts focus, it's interesting. That's, for many folks, a tremendous sense of pride. There also seems to be a little bit of a tension between the focus on liberal arts and the focus on the professional schools and more of the traditional work-related avenues. So that's not certainly not uncommon, and that tension, I think, is folks are looking for additional clarity around how those pieces fit together. Clearly in the campus, in terms of the beauty of the campus, the integrity of the design, the commitment to that, that's also something that I think faculty and staff appreciate. And in terms of special and unique qualities, certainly there are other colleges and universities that have great campuses, and that's a recognition category in the Great Colleges to Work For program. And it is something that I think potentially is a strength of your roles today in terms of a potential element of that special and unique culture, something that differentiates you than many other colleges and universities for potentially whom you're competing for talent. The next two slides, and I do want to move through these a little bit quickly so we can get some individual statements. What we're looking at here, the 26 statements we can group into different themes or categories. So when we do the factor analysis, these are highly correlated statements. So here, what we're looking at is the average positive response across the dimension themes. So to provide some context there, when you see a positive response at the 75% level or above, that's outstanding. That's what we would characterize at the elite level. When we look at the honor roll benchmarks, most of them are going to be at that level or higher. 55 to 65% we would suggest is indicative of a culture, a workplace quality that's in the good to very good range. Below 55%, if you have aspirational goals of being an employer of choice, or being known for your ability to recruit world-class faculty and staff, or to recruit diverse faculty and staff. Positive response below 55% are ones that are areas that are going to need attention. We'll disaggregate these here momentarily. The second of our dimensions, you look at shared governance, below 50% positive on that, similar to the experience of senior leadership and collaboration. Collaboration, faculty, administration, and staff relations, and shared governance, those three dimensions are all highly correlated. So in many regards, not surprising that they're similar there. One of the other differentiated qualities of great workplaces is that they tend to be great workplaces for everybody, not just the senior leadership, or not just tenured faculty, or not just those at the director level. And what we see when we disaggregate the data by job category, in many regards, is a high degree of consistency. While the range does span 16% between 59 and 43, there's a lot of commonality here. One of the things I shared earlier with the group is, there are common pain points. Though the reason for the pain points may be different depending where you sit in the organization, nobody has a monopoly on feeling understaffed or feeling unappreciated. It's not just a faculty issue. There's an element where faculty do not feel that historically administration has included them in the conversations or listened to their input as much, which informs them feeling a little bit unappreciated or uninvolved. Similarly, for many staff, there's a sense that their efforts aren't appreciated by faculty, that in many regards they're treated as quote-unquote second-class citizens. So the common theme is a lack of appreciation, though the drivers of that may be different. Similarly, when we look at it by division, in the same fashion that great workplaces tend to be great workplaces across job category, they also tend to be great workplaces across divisions. One of the things, while this is the first time we've administered a survey like this, we've set, I think, a good baseline for being able to, in subsequent surveys, do even more detailed analysis at the unit level. We certainly have some of that ability, and we'll likely be doing some of that moving forward, so we can see where there are pockets of excellence, where there's some common issues, and how we can collectively address some of those themes. I think oftentimes there's a tendency to simply focus on the lowest scoring statements and see what we need to do to fix those. That's certainly an important part of any analysis. As I mentioned earlier, it's important to know what's special and unique about being a member of this community. One way to get a sense of that is by looking at the strengths of the data set. What are those things, what are those statements where you scored the highest? You see statement 9, this tremendous sense of pride that we talked about. At the work group level, there is a much higher degree of satisfaction. You can see the 80% positive, 4% negative as it compares to the 3 positives on our benchmark. While not at the elite level, still very, very strong. I think it is absolutely worth noting to statement 9 that sense of pride is what I would characterize at that elite level. Right? Even though some of the parts may not add up to that, there is nonetheless a tremendous sense of pride. When we look at the supervisor statements, there is a group of statements where we're essentially asking about supervisor competencies. One of the things we know as a function of the employee engagement research is that if we want an engaged workforce, one of the most important things we can do is ensure that those who are in supervisory roles have the skills and the ability and the training and the support to be effective in those roles. Right? The experience of one's immediate supervisor has significant impact on what they think of the organization as a whole. We've got some pretty good news in this survey based on that. It's a relative strength here. You get a sense of that in terms of statement 11, consistency of modeling the values. We'll look at some other statements as well. Statement 12 is also a supervisor statement. It also loads on the communication dimension or theme. My supervisor department chair actively solicits my suggestions and ideas. So some nice findings at that level. Statement 26 is an important statement from a diversity, inclusive excellence, and if an institution is looking at achieving a Hispanic serving institution designation or something to that effect, then these are statements that we want to do well on. 73% positive at this point on statement 26 is a nice finding. Fair and balanced. Talked about the good, let's talk about the bad. So these are the pain points. These are the 5 statements on which we scored the lowest. So we get a sense of that resource constraints in statement 3. Statement 20, 16, 7 are all communication statements. There's an element of collaboration there as well. But statement 20, there's regular and open communication among faculty, administration, and staff. 31% positive, 27% negative. When you see a negative response that at the 20% level or higher, that absolutely should be something we're paying attention to. When we have 1 in 5 of our community who are experiencing some organizational dynamic or some managerial competency, the exact opposite of how we would want them to, that's something we need to pay attention to. Statement 16, senior leadership communicates openly about important matters. Clearly, many faculty and staff are eager for more communication from and with senior leadership, and the communication issues here extend beyond senior leadership. And you'll get a sense of that. You get a sense of that even in statement 20, but in statement 7 as well. Faculty, administration, staff are meaningfully involved in institutional planning at 36% positive. I do want to take a second right here to just differentiate between statements 20 and 7 for a second. I think of it hierarchically in many regards. If we're going to collaborate well as a leadership team, as an organization, as a university, it's pretty important that we communicate well. I've yet to see the high-performing team that collaborates really well that doesn't communicate well. So when I see a finding like I do on statement 20, it is not surprising then to see a similar finding on statement 7. Statement 24 is a really interesting one, and it's in some regards there's a bit of incongruity here. Because I've already spoken about one of the strengths of this culture today is this tremendous sense of community, right? This tremendous sense of camaraderie that we have. But it doesn't necessarily translate, as you saw in that earlier slide, to strong degrees of cross-functional collaboration or the sense that we're all on the same team, right? This is, if we were keeping a list of differentiating qualities of great workplaces, this would be another one. The perception that we're all on the same team. Again, we're going to make these slides available to you. I think part of the richness of an opportunity like this is to be able to have some dialogue about this. So I want to make sure we create time for that, for questions and comments. And I want to inject a little bit more data into the conversation. So we talked earlier about the potential strain between the traditional liberal arts college and professional studies and the focus on building professional studies. I think for many, they're still trying to find on the faculty side of the house a sense of equilibrium between the expectations regarding teaching, service, and research. Right? So where is that balance, and what are the expectations? And you certainly get a sense of that in the faculty responses. We've got a couple here to provide a little bit more insight into that. Statement 4 is another statement related to diversity and inclusive excellence at 64% positive relative strength, certainly not at the elite levels, but I think, again, I would characterize that as a relative strength, something that a particular part of the community that people appreciate, the appreciation and open and welcoming environment to diverse populations. So we talked about a hierarchy of communication and collaboration. Our ability to communicate informs our ability to collaborate, and a very specific form of collaboration within higher ed clearly is shared governance. So we have different expectations here than we would in other industries or sectors. Statement 5 is an interesting statement. We're not asking about the effectiveness of the shared governance model. We're simply asking if people understand the shared governance model, particularly the role of faculty in that. And today, less than half our population responded positively to that statement. So I think there is an opportunity to help better educate folks around what the shared governance model is here at Midwestern State University, what the various roles are of the various stakeholder and constituent groups, and importantly, where the decision-making authority lies. Are these board decisions, are they cabinet decisions, are they decisions that are delegated down to other parts or other groups? Nice finding on statement 6 in terms of faculty feeling involved in decisions related to the education program. When we expand the frame in statement 7 and ask about institutional planning, we see a little bit. I think one of the things that we've talked about in some of the earlier meetings is given that the strategic plan is being looked at, revisited, tweaked, it's an opportunity here today, moving forward, to give folks a different experience of their involvement in things like institutional planning and the strategic planning process. We've talked about this tremendous sense of pride. We've talked a little bit about already on statement 8 in terms of that work group level. There are a number of different frameworks that we could look at or use to assess kind of workplace quality. One of them, a very simple one that I think is useful in terms of looking at some of the things that inform great workplaces, is essentially what I'm going to call the 3-lens model, where we look at what is it faculty and staff experience through their individual lens, the things related to them most directly on a day-to-day basis, the work that they do, the support they get in that work, professional development opportunities they have. So that's the kind of individual perspective. The work group perspective is, in many regards, just that. My experience as an employee, as a faculty member, with those with whom I work most closely and most regularly. Right? The sense of community, the sense of camaraderie, how well we work together. That would be the work group perspective. The third perspective then being the organization perspective, the extent to which I feel connected to and confident in the organization as a whole. Do I know the direction of the university? Am I comfortable and aligned with the direction of the university? Do I have confidence in the policies and practices, whether they be related to compensation, work-life balance, or benefits? At great workplaces, there's a high degree of satisfaction across all three. Right? So today at Midwestern State University, we see good responses, high satisfaction with the first and second, less so with the third. Now, how is it we create a greater sense of connection to the organization as a whole? I mentioned that supervisor department chair was a relative strength today, so we saw one or two statements. Those weren't isolated findings. Statement 10, in terms of providing feedback, that's critical in terms of having a culture of accountability. So very nice finding at 69% positive today on that, modeling the values and the suggestions and ideas we saw on our top 10 list. Senior leadership. So in the same fashion that one of the drivers of the engaged workforce is the experience of supervisors, there is a growing body of research that's documenting and essentially establishing that what faculty and staff think of senior leadership has significant impact on what they think of the organization as a whole. Similarly, what I, as an employee of the organization, think senior leadership thinks of me also has significant impact. Do I believe that senior leadership thinks I am a cog in the machine that is Midwestern State University, or do I believe that they care about me as a person, that they want me to be successful in my role, and they want me to be successful in my roles outside of my work at Midwestern State University? So we get some insight into a couple important dimensions when we ask about senior leadership here. Certainly an important one, Statement 13, senior leadership provides a clear direction for Midwestern State University future at 44 and 16. I think it is important to note that this survey, like any survey, is a snapshot at a particular point in time. We administered this as survey in August. The fact that we're in a strategic planning process right now, and we'll be doing more so next week, very specifically, I think next time we see the survey, we'll likely see some different results. But this is where we were. Confidence in senior leadership, you get a sense of that in statements 14. 15 gives us some insight into that dynamic I was just talking about in terms of faculty and staff believing that there is a genuine interest in their well-being from senior leadership. Statement 16, senior leadership communicates openly about important matters at 34 and 28 respectively. Big gap with where we see the best-in-class schools today. Statement 18 is a credibility statement. I believe what I'm told by senior leadership. It's an important one, and I know having had lunch with the cabinet, I share with them that sometimes when we get senior leadership results back, there's a tendency to deny the data, right? We don't like the way the statement's asked, or we don't like the timing of the statement. I didn't get any of that from your senior leadership team. There's an ownership of the data. And I didn't see anything in this survey that suggested to me that anybody's integrity is being maligned, or there's a belief that anybody's acting with malicious intent. And having done surveys like this with a lot of colleges and universities, there's two areas that I see commonly kind of trip up leadership, not just at the senior or cabinet level, but that is unintended promises and mixed messages. And it can be very simple. So moving forward, I think it's going to be important in terms of giving faculty and staff a more consistent, more positive, more aligned experience of senior leadership. Consistent, positive, and aligned. That's something we talked about in our brunch show. And not going to certainly read all of these, but these certainly what I would characterize comments like this was a theme, a couple of themes that we saw in the responses to the open-ended questions. So communication, you'll see here is a common theme, the sense of alignment among senior leadership and pulling in the right direction, and the quality of the communication. Two things that differentiate communication in these great workplaces, I've alluded to already, but one is appropriate transparency, and two is a real opportunity to have dialogue, to give and take, that we're talking with versus just talking to faculty and staff. Again, faculty, staff, administration relations, shared governance, collaboration, all integrally related. This is also related to that statement we saw just a minute ago about the sense that we're all on the same team. If there is a sense that they're all on the same team, we would likely see a stronger response on statement 19. So these, again, pretty much connected. The communication, and I referenced earlier that while folks are eager for more communication from and with senior leadership, right, more transparency, more interactive processes, the communication opportunities extend beyond that. Right? It's not just a senior leadership communication opportunity. Certainly there's work there, and I think the question to consider is how is it we raise the quality of dialogue across the university as a whole. I'll speak to statement 22 very specifically here because in most cases these days, most of the strategic plans that I see at colleges and universities have language or goals or initiatives related to being a culture of innovation. Some even have innovation institutes or the ability to operate more efficiently or more effectively. And if that's the case, if we truly aspire to have a culture of innovation or a culture of creativity, we want to ensure that we can challenge the traditional way of doing things without fear of repercussions, that we can discuss and debate issues respectfully without it becoming personal. So when I see a statement like 22, at Midwestern State University, we discuss and debate issues respectfully to get better results at 45 and 15, I think there's a real opportunity. Silver lining on that, while the negative is 15, I'd be much more concerned if that negative was at 25, 30% positive. We've got a lot of folks here who are in that kind of fence-sitting area, who are given the midpoint on the scale is sometimes agree, sometimes disagree. So the midpoint isn't a bad finding, it's just not as consistently positive as we would ultimately want if we really want to distinguish ourselves as an employer of choice. Statement 24, sense that we're all on the same team. I mentioned that cross-functional collaboration, you get a sense of that in statement 23. And again, this is a little unusual to see the high degree of camaraderie that people report, right? And the tremendous sense of community, yet it's not necessarily translating to cooperating well across departments or creating the sense that at the end of the day, we all are on the same page. Statement 23 we've talked about, so I'll move quickly through this. Statement 25, this is something that higher ed as a whole has not been very effective at to date. We're starting to see some improvement on this in terms of creating a culture of appreciation. It's important from a couple different angles. Certainly one is the formal policies and practices associated with an appreciation and recognition program. So regularly in higher ed, we have years of service awards, distinguished teaching awards, oftentimes distinguished service awards on the non-academic side of the house. And the operative statement, one of the things that we're looking for in recognition programs are those programs actually meaningful to employees? Right? A lot of times these, particularly years of service recognition programs, become kind of stale. So it becomes going through the motions and it's not providing the value that we think it is or the real impact on the employees. While the formal processes are important, the informal processes are as well. We get a sense of that in Statement 25. I am regularly recognized for my contributions. So, while we saw some very solid and strong findings on some of the competencies at the supervisory level, that doesn't mean there's not room for improvement or things we can do to even take that to the next level. So one of the things that I would wonder about is how is it we're preparing those who are in supervisory roles to be effective in creating a culture of appreciation? Are our supervisors, managers, and leaders, regardless of what side of the house they're on, are they equally diligent about catching people doing things right and acknowledging and celebrating and praising that as we are about catching people when they come up short? But something to think about. The open-ended questions were a little different for the external stakeholder groups, so we'll look a little at these. And in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of summarize some of the main themes. I'll give you a second to look at each slide, and then we'll move through. But among the consistent themes, regardless of who the audience was this theme of growth. There's a lot of optimism and excitement about growth. Growth as it relates to ensuring and in strengthening the quality of the student experience. Growth as it relates to increasing enrollment. Growth as it relates to building on the strong relationships in the Wichita Falls community and extending the reach of Midwestern State University outside of Wichita Falls. Growth in terms of, related to that former, enhancing the brand of Midwestern State University in Texas and nationally. We talked about growth in enrollment. And, this was also interesting that as we look at the responses of board members and community leaders and even donors, there was a sense for many that there is a need to focus on communication and relationship building at Midwestern State University, whether it be with faculty administration or faculty and staff. So even those who aren't necessarily in here day in, day out, recognize that it's really important to tend to relationship and that ensure that the communication is smooth. And on that note, we will, after the donor slide, leave with a quote. Edgar Schein is probably one of the more preeminent theorists on organization culture, wrote a book recently entitled Humble Inquiry. and talked about the importance of relationship in our ability to get things done. And I want to leave you with that quote before we go into questions and answers. One of the things I'm commonly asked, what are the keys to building a great workplace? And I think oftentimes there's a misperception that it's about compensation and benefits. And my short answer to that is that you can't simply buy your way into being a great workplace. I've seen lots of organizations where folks are compensated very well. They have tremendous benefits, including foosball tables and ping pong tables and kitchens, and their people are pretty miserable. And at the end of the day, among the things that's most important, most critical in terms of being a great workplace is the quality of relationships that people experience. The relationship with their supervisor, the relationship with their colleagues, and the relationship with senior leadership. I think Shine hits it on the nose when he talks about relationships being good to are key to good communication, and communication is the key to successful task accomplishment. I think the survey process itself has surfaced some of the known issues, providing some data now to move forward so that folks aren't managing by gut feeling, and identified some of the key issues in terms of communication, vision, alignment among leadership at the senior level, but also at different levels of leadership within the organization, and the importance of tending to the already strong relationships that are such a defining part of Midwestern State University. So with that, I welcome questions, comments, and or additional thoughts. Yes.
I'm just curious, were student workers included in the employee responses? And if so, do you know about how many?
Yeah. So we did not include student workers in a survey of this nature. They are sometimes, but frankly infrequently, included in larger climate surveys. More often than not, those surveys are targeted more specifically for those kind of dimensions, dynamics that are particularly relevant for student workers. Good question. Other questions or comments?
In relation to the categories, when you talked about senior management and senior leadership, was that broken down in the surveys so that actually the individuals who were answering those questions understood the group that they were actually evaluating?
Yeah, great question. So there were there were 4 terms that we defined at the beginning of the survey and that showed up on the survey itself, every page of the survey as you toggle through the survey. So one of those was the term senior leadership. So for this purposes of this survey, we defined senior leadership as the president and those who directly report to the president. And we also expanded that the president was not the incoming president, not the new president. It was the previous president. So the frame of reference should be for the captain. It's not uncommon, and this is, as a leadership transition survey, they tend to be shorter than a more comprehensive climate survey. And in some of those more comprehensive climate surveys, it's not uncommon to add additional levels of leadership. So for example, here we saw senior leadership defined, and we saw that term being used in those statements. Sometimes we'll ask similar statements of academic leadership defined differently, or of deans. So in subsequent surveys, we may want to look at how we're assessing different levels of leadership.
So I've got a question for Dr. Shipley. We got a lot of information here. A lot of good information. And Rich and I were talking beforehand, and in my background in the business world, I come from a firm that did a lot of surveys, did a lot of stuff with surveys. But surveys are great only to the extent that you can do things with the information and make it better. So I know I'm putting you on the spot, but do you have plans to make this better? Because I hear Rich, I love the way you're spinning this. It's like, oh, this isn't bad, this is good, this is bad. I'm an accountant. I'm looking at the numbers and I'm seeing bad.
Yeah.
We got to get better.
Yeah. Well, I didn't intend for it to come off as spin. I think I'm relatively objective. But I think for me, the reality is you all haven't done anything like this before.
Never.
So if we do this survey again in 2 years and 3 years, when I'm up here, you'll hear a different tone, right? And a different message. And the extent that y'all haven't been intentional about it, they are what they are right now. And I hadn't shared this with Dr. Shipley, but I had occasion to do another survey it was a presidential transition, but in a corporation. And the incoming president, the results came in, and they weren't as positive as he thought they were going to be. And he said to his vice presidents, in I think a supportive way, but also appropriately accountable. Said, you know what, this year everybody gets a free pass, right? I haven't been here before, I haven't made my expectations clear, you don't know about my style and my philosophy, so they are what they are. And we're gonna do this again in 12 months, and in 12 months, there aren't gonna be any free passes. So they are what they are. And then perhaps not as positive in some areas as we would want. And I wouldn't want y'all to beat yourselves up about these results by any means. I think there's lots of potential here, and I'm not just blowing sunshine your way.
Let me be clear.
Sure.
I completely agree with that comment.
Yeah.
And I think this board knows that I think we've got a lot of things we can build on here. And I think that it's really important for us to take this data and build on it.
Yeah.
And I think that we will. I just want to make sure that we as a board understand how we go about doing that. And that's why Dr. Shipley's sitting in the chair, and so we need to press on with that.
And the last piece I'll say on that, in terms of, I think one of the things that the board can do to support that work, to the extent we're going to hold Dr. Shipley and the cabinet accountable for this, is ensuring they have the support to do this kind of work.
Absolutely.
So we talked at lunch a little bit, the cabinet, about the survey cycle. How often do we administer a survey like this? It's different in higher ed than the private sector. So whereas at KPMG, we probably surveyed on an annual basis, in higher ed institutions of this size, the cycle would likely be more 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I would not want us to do this again in a year. We got too many other things to mess with, so, which we're going to hear about later.
Great.
Anybody else have any other questions? Comments? Great. Mr. Boyer, thank you for visiting with us today, and Dr. Shipley, thank you for putting this together, because I do think these things are extremely meaningful. And as I pointed out, we really are looking forward to what the administration can do with this data and make it even better. So, which leads us to the next item.
Right.
Item 1602, MSU priorities, development of strategic priorities. Dr. Shipley, if you could discuss these next steps and the timetable for process, please.
Yes, so we'll take the survey results. Rich is out today speaking with faculty and staff. There were a few student surveys given, but it was so early on we didn't get a lot of responses. So it's mainly the faculty and staff groups who are hearing the survey responses today. We'll load them up on the website. And what we've decided to do is that the cabinet will go back in January to February and drill down into their areas to talk about some of these responses, and probably lift out 4 to 5 areas that they'd like to address specifically in their reporting lines. So we'll have time to talk about that. Right now is when the academic year is really hitting full stride, and we don't think this is the right time to be going in and trying to have warm and fuzzy conversations about who we want to be. We want to get that in. When it gets cold, we can have coffee or apple cider and talk about that. But what we are doing next week on the heels of this is that when I came, I inherited a list of about 200 priorities. They were good priorities, but I didn't think I couldn't accomplish 200 things without more focus. So I gave those to the cabinet. They came back and we narrowed those priorities to about 24. And on Monday, now that the campus has seen the survey results, I'll be meeting with the faculty to discuss those priorities. They'll see the list. They'll hear me present why I think this is a list. We'll have time for dialogue and questions. I'll meet with the staff and the students on Tuesday. They'll see the same list of priorities, have time for discussion and questions. Then the next week we'll send out a Survey Monkey survey asking, were these the right priorities? Were they in the right order? Did we miss something? Would you delete something? And just use technology to be able to give us some response. We'll collect those as people are over the holiday break, and when they come back, while the cabinet is talking to groups about how we deal with some of the information from the survey, I'll be talking to the governance groups about the results of the strategic initiatives and people's thoughts about those. All of this combines to prepare us for a board retreat in February. So in January, we're getting the last of our input, finalizing the strategic priorities, and in February, I'll come to you and ask you to look at our strategic priorities, a budget plan for achieving them, a facilities plan that shows how the facilities will reflect some of these goals, and probably a fundraising plan to talk about where the budget plan doesn't quite match our aspirations, what type of fundraising potential we have. So that's in a nutshell from now to February.
Any questions?
Everybody okay with that? Thank you.
Any questions? Okay. Thank you. We look forward to continuing progress here. And again, Dr. Shipley, it looks like you guys are all over this
I'm
with
trying to.
that. So,
Mr. Boyer gave the governance leaders the results that you see today about a month ago, so we've had faculty senate, staff senate, we've had those results to work on the priority.
fantastic. Item 1603, board resolutions, a resolution of appreciation for Dr. Norman Horner was suggested by Dr. Gibbons in August, and this resolution was prepared and sent to the board for review and is being circulated now and is presented for approval. A second resolution is also being passed around for your signature. This resolution we approved in August, and it's for Jesse Brown. It was lost in the mail when it was sent to Sam for signature. Couldn't sign the document again. Make sure that Jesse gets it this time.
We're not gonna mail it to Kenny.
No.
Sign. He's gonna have to come here.
Kenny's
and
gonna have to
sign.
come in. Jesse, you're gonna have to bring it back so he can sign it. Is there a motion to approve the resolution for Dr. Horner as presented?
I'll move.
Second? Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item is the executive session will be held later this afternoon. The committee of the whole stands in recess until that time. We'll now move on to the regular committee business. The executive committee meeting will now come to order. You have time?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. Members of the committee joining me today are Mr. Bernhardt and Ms. Burks. Our first item is item 1605, approval of the minutes of the executive committee meeting August 6th. Are there any additions or corrections? If not, they will stand approved as presented. Item 1606, MSU deferred maintenance plan or deferred maintenance reports, campus condition index. The reports included in the agenda are required by statute to show deferred maintenance projects completed in fiscal 2015, as well as those planned for the next 5 years. Does anyone have any questions for Kyle regarding these reports? Is there anything you want to talk about on these reports, Kyle?
I don't really have anything to add.
Okay. Okay. It's a long list, Kyle. Okay. This item is presented for information only and no action is necessary. I hope you guys had a chance to review it because it is a long list and it does show, I think, two things. It shows the fact that we got a lot of work to do, and secondly, it shows you how talented Kyle is because the list is very comprehensive. Item 1607, campus facilities implementation plan and construction update. The agenda includes project status reports and a report on smaller construction projects. And Kyle, I believe you have photographs of current projects to share with us as well.
Given that I'm from Dallas originally, and I'm probably not going to be able to articulate quite as well or talk as fast as Mr. Boyd. See what I can do. We'll start with the student housing project. You may recall. Okay.
Uh-oh. Cindy? Kyle needs help.
Hit it about 4 times. I'm afraid all of a sudden it's going to go again.
Kyle needs help.
Sure.
Kyle, I just told everybody how talented you were. And
I'm usually a little better.
there you go.
You may recall about 6 months ago, the student housing project was parked next 3 months.
Is it the PowerPoint one?
Yes.
Okay.
For the red light.
Next.
Next.
Okay.
Over the next 3 months, we removed or demoed the parking lot, tore out about 3-4 foot of soil, backfilled with new soil, and started drilling about 120 piers. And then over the last 3 months, we moved built the slab and the concrete podium, which is basically the first level, and started erecting and framing the second and third levels. We actually started putting flooring in for the fourth level this week. And Buford Thompson has a drone that they use to document their construction projects. They gave me this slide, and it shows really how tight the construction site is. There's not a lot of room to work around, and also identifies the one portion we have left to pour concrete on the north end down there, and that will actually be poured starting tomorrow morning about 5. So tomorrow afternoon we should be through with all the concrete in the structure. Actually, as far as Clark Student Center, over the summer, Chartwell's demoed out a lot of the food court area, and so beginning of the school year, the students had Chick-fil-A, Burrito Bowl, Grill Nation, and new furniture and finishes in the food court area. And shortly after that, in the fall, they moved the coffee shop that was in Dillard over to Moffett, and then started construction on an Einstein's Bagel that will open up actually on Monday, start serving food. And lastly, we have the Mass Comm building that the design has been bid. We received the bids last week, and we're anticipating a guaranteed maximum price for the next few weeks from Buford Thompson. We'll kind of go from there. In the meantime, that just shows the area where we will do the construction. Any questions?
Kyle, can you point out specifically where it's gonna be? I mean, just for us, just so we can. Oh.
We'll go back.
Yeah, just, yeah, that's fine. Right, just on that end cap there, right there.
You would go,
Okay,
it'll occupy much of that
okay.
space. We'll have to clear this out. And pretty much everything south of that, there's an electrical duct bank about right here. The building will be right on the edge of that, so we don't have to move it.
Okay.
Now, does that have potential to affect that residential parking lot?
During the construction as well, the construction zone will come out about the middle of the road down the yellow line. And so parking should still remain there, but we need to be able to get these dumpsters dumped, and so we've got to keep track of that. The only parking that will be affected is right over here, about something like 12, 15 spaces that we need to do a construction trailer. And lay equipment there.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. Any questions or comments for Kyle on the construction update? Thanks, Cindy. This item is presented for information only and no action is necessary. Item 1608, Masscom addition construction. You heard Kyle mention the contract up there. The administration is requesting authorization to enter into a contract with Buford Thompson Construction for the addition to the Fane Fine Arts Center at a guaranteed maximum price not to exceed $4.6 million with the debt paid from the HEAP funds. Dr. Follett, please discuss this recommendation.
As you might recall, sorry. As you might recall, we had a plan to add to the mass communications building for $5 million overall the plan. And so what we're asking for today is to the guaranteed maximum price of 4.6. That would be the construction portion of the building. Doesn't include equipment or furniture in that.
Could I have a motion to approve this item as presented?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussions or questions regarding this proposal? Okay, we have a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 1609, Athletics Intramural Facilities Plan. As you recall, in the May board meeting, we authorized a $6 per semester credit hour increase to the university services fee and designated the funds generated by this increase for the improvement of the athletics and intramural facilities. Specific action was delayed to give Dr. Shipley an opportunity to review options and considerations with the administration. The agenda presents a recommended financing plan and also outlines the proposed plans for a new outdoor basketball court, artificial turf on the softball field, and building a new soccer complex on the south campus. Dr. Fillet will give an overview of the project financing, followed by Dr. Shipley, who will discuss the soccer field placement. Dr. Fillet?
If you turn to attachment 1609, it lays out the plan for the financing of what we want to do. Soccer would be around $4 million, and that would be to build 2 fields and actually move the whole soccer complex that is south of Fame Fine Arts Building to the south campus. Softball would be artificially turfed, and that would allow it to be used for intramural use, which it can't be now because it's grass and we have to protect it. I believe, Megan, you asked last go around, we took out the outdoor basketball court in order to expand the parking lot. So we've found a spot over on the old Christ Academy green space to put another outdoor basketball court to replace the one we took out. And then we've got a subtotal of 4.5, and then the miscellaneous conditions and architectural fees for a total of 5.14. Now what we're going to do is we're going to split out how to finance that. We're going to use a master lease that the state has, and it's a variable rate, but it's very inexpensive. Right now it's about 0.5% on money. And we'll finance the artificial turf, the bleachers, and the lights, anything that's movable kinds of things. And artificial turf actually is movable. We didn't pay the bill. They could come and roll it up and take it away. So we'll be financing those areas through the master lease because it's pretty cheap money. The rest of it we're going to self-finance. We have enough cash on hand that we can take the other, $1.9 million and use our own cash and pay for that back over time with the fee. So it would take right now about 6 years to pay it back with the fee, and that's assuming no enrollment growth, which we know that's not going to hopefully happen. We're going to have some enrollment growth, so we could probably pay it back even quicker.
Dr. Shipley?
Okay, so if you turn the page and begin to look at pictures, you can see that we've done some work on where the field might go, and I followed the master plan planning for the location of this field, and I had them turn it several different ways. So at first it was going east-west, and now the way you see the field, you have a stadium going north-south and a right field going north-south because that's the optimal sort of orientation when you play soccer, because you don't want to be looking in the sun as you're shooting goals. And no matter what way you turn it, if you flip to the last picture, you'll see that it encroaches on the front yard of the Sykes house by about half the width of a football field and the entire length of a football field. So you'll see that to put a rec field and the soccer stadium, no matter how you put it, you're building into the Sykes front lawn. And so out of respect for your previous planning, I wanted you to see this, and I welcome your comments on it. That's currently the recommendation, but it does have a significant impact on the Sykes house.
So, how do we want to talk some
Yeah,
before?
let's
Let's
talk about
Okay, because I have to, I got to tell the board, so when Dr. Shipley and I chatted on Tuesday, I asked the question, and then Dr. Shipley called me back, and basically said, hey, that's been bugging me. So this is what we had talked about for probably the last couple of board meetings. And I don't know that it's been clear, but with that rec field, it really pushes this onto the Sykes lawn. And I think that Dr. Shipley asked, who actually did the research on whether people.
Who was the architect doing this?
Chris Rice,
Chris,
the
the
master planner.
master planner.
Okay, but I think, didn't you ask somebody to take a look at alternatives for the rec
Chris,
field?
Chris.
Chris did.
Yes.
So there are alternatives to put the rec field somewhere else, okay? Not right next to the soccer stadium. And so I just want you guys to understand that this is, it bothers me that it infringes on the Sykes lawn that much. If it was 5 feet, I don't know that we'd have a conversation, but it's 100 feet of infringement.
Sean, can I ask you why?
Why does it bother me?
There are plenty of presidential houses that are on campuses that don't have a yard at all. They're tied into the campus directly. What's the
Yeah.
green space?
Because we've got other options. We've got other options, and that's the main reason. Because here's the other thing: if in fact if we moved the stadium to where the rec field is now, we could have other options down the road for other things to put in there that wouldn't be as immediate. And we could go ahead and move the rec field to someplace on campus, whether it be where football fields are now, whether it be the other side of Sykes House, whether it be Christ Academy. It could be, there's like 3 or 4 options. That's my only point is that we stay loyal to the plan with this. And it's just coming very clear to me that it probably needs more conversation.
And this is kind of all tied in together in my mind, the outdoor basketball court. This is in addition to the Red Wine Rec Center
Right,
that the students have full use of.
right.
And so, I don't remember the outdoor basketball courts being a part of the master plan.
It wasn't, what happened was, if you remember, when we took the parking in over here for that, we basically, the outdoor basketball facility was just one court, was taken out. We took it out. And I think Jesse and other students raised their hand and said, wait a minute, that gets a lot of use. We would hate for that to go away. So that's why that's back in here.
Well, I guess I'm just, since we're looking at that whole piece of it, the outdoor courts are something that are going to be used in conjunction with, let's say, the other student athletic, or I guess student rec center location. Why couldn't it be put, we have space around there. I guess, why are we picking Christ Academy? And if that's where the rec field could go, I'm assuming that we're looking at all these different options to figure out where it's best to put the outdoor basketball court. Why put it by Christ when it could be by the rec center? And then if that's green space and it's open, why couldn't the rec field go there? I guess I'm just trying to see, so we're looking at all of that before we come in and go.
I think that's a fair comment. I think you should look at that.
Well, I think this has been looked at a lot, and the way all the dominoes fall, it's very complex, and it also has to do with what utilities are underground and what you can build over. But I think our option might have been to use the Pecan Grove, and it was deemed fairly controversial to do that at this time. And at some point, the Pecan Grove to the east of the house might end up being needed for building, because we're pretty landlocked right now. We kept thinking when we began to realize how controversial of a move this could be when people drive by the Sykes House and see half of one side of the lawn cut out with a stadium there and lighting, and we have another alternative to bring forward today if we'd like to look at it. It's just, it takes a while to line this all up. And it looks like we have a lot of land, but everywhere you put something like this, there is some controversy involved. There are other places to put a rec field, but they are also difficult. So we may have found a place to put a rec field that people would like, and we thought if we put this forward and you have a problem with its adjacency to the Sykes House, we'd look at this other location.
You know, the advantage of having it side by side is the press box dual sided and
That's correct.
sharing the restrooms, that type of thing.
That's
But
true.
is that as important as we don't want to lose the integrity of the president's home either?
Well,
No.
I think the house at some point will be scrunched and use more of the land around it. The question is, do we have to do this now? Because it was made very clear to me when I was applying that the area around the Sykes House will become more and more a part of the campus. It's been left alone for a while, and I don't have a problem with that. The question is, do we still have a little more time? But you're right, having the field side by side is great. You've got the parking and you've got the bathrooms. The question is there another location where we could have the same?
And let me add something to this too. There is nothing that says option 2 is the right answer, and there's nothing that says option 1 is the right answer. I think the point is that as you look at this plan, it's important to think about long-term ramifications. I think that's the key. And again, I think it was confusing enough, at least for me, that I felt like, and I think Dr. Shipley definitely felt like, that we should have some additional conversation about it.
Would that delay making, what would happen?
Not if you like option 2 that we have to show you today. It wouldn't, but we could certainly stay with option 1. I mean, I'm not here to try to turn things upside down.
One other quick follow-up question, and then water. Where are we at on water?
Well, these are both artificial fields, so
Right, but I'm talking about like, if we have a lot of green space, we're talking about the pecan orchard, where are we at with the water?
I don't know the answer to that.
I mean, is there
Develop.
irrigation?
Yes, sir.
Is there irrigation
Mm-hmm.
over in the pecan orchard?
Like, is there a big expense associated with that? I guess assuming when we do touch that, if and when that ever happens.
I think you could ease enough because there's utilities along Midwestern Parkway that you could tap into. A lot of, as far as the well goes, we'd have to drill a new one in that area.
There's a cool one right in the middle of that orchard.
There's not, I don't,
Yeah.
No, it's workable.
I just saw it today, that's why.
I was gonna say, how do you know that?
when you move the boards out, you can't see the three.
I'm just kidding. It was-
Are you
meant to be a
suggesting
joke.
is it like a grass field on that side?
Well, no, I mean, I'm okay with the artificial. I think that's the way, just to be smart as an investment, we're gonna have to go, because I don't know that water's ever gonna really change, right? That complication. What I was looking at is if we're going to evaluate adjusting the master plan and where we place stuff, I think we need to really, as a board, consider it all. The pecan orchard, if we can't sustain it because we don't have the water to be able to water it, and we don't anticipate that that's gonna change, then that needs to be on our forefront of our conversation. So those types of green spaces, while I think they definitely have, there's a lot of sentimental value and attraction to the university and how beautiful it is. But I think also as a board, we have to look at and balance the expense associated with maintaining it and incorporating it in what we do.
Do we water the orchard now?
No, it's not irrigated now.
Okay.
That's why I was
If I could make one comment, we are watering the football fields, the play fields, and from well water. And the well water has a lot of salts and minerals in it that we have to run it through reverse osmosis, and even then, it's not gonna hold up for forever because of that. So if we do put fields over there that we irrigate with well water, it's not that simple. The turf is not gonna last you with well water, because you've gotta, it's just the minerals.
But if we did artificial, like
We
the
did
current plan
artificial,
does.
then
Yeah,
obviously don't have that
I'm good with the
problem.
artificial. It's pretty cool.
Does the artificial restrict the use of it? I mean, are we going to say, oh, we can't have this on there because it wears out our turf and we
Well,
have to replace
I
it?
would say that the condition the board passed to get that $6 credit hour was that it would be open for student use and intramural use as well as athletic use. And that was specifically why we're doing artificial turf, so that anybody can use it and it'll hold up.
I think that's a question for Kyle. Will it? What will be the life of it The artificial turf I've seen was maintained very well for special games. And will this hold up?
It should last 10 to 12 years, and it comes with the grooming equipment, the vacuum it. And we'll have to every 2 or 3 years probably install more pellets in it, chrome rubber, whatever you call it.
Yeah, so Linwood, I think if you recall, one of the things, and Charlie, step in here. I think one of the concerns expressed by students was that if we pass this, are we really just passing something for athletics? I think it's very clear
That's the question.
that we're not. There may be more wear and tear on it with student use, but that's the whole purpose of putting it down. It's still better than grass.
When we, from the very first day, it was a win-win for both our students.
Stay there.
When we installed, with the whole reason we were doing it was gonna be a win-win for both athletics and the students. 'Cause we can- everybody uses it.
Definitely, I think that's something that students are really looking forward to as well. I guess my question would be, if we don't build this rec center right next to it, is the priority of having that rec field, is that priority postponed, or will it still be built?
We have another location if you'd like to look at it. So it would still be built. If you like the other location, it would still be built. If you like this location, it will be built.
Okay.
It's not postponing it, it's redefining where we put it, who we put. I mean, we can still go with this if the board feels comfortable with it.
I want to ask a question.
Go ahead.
This is probably dumb, but if we have a soccer field that's field turf, why can't it double as a rec field? Why we have to have both?
I think the answer to that is it could, but during the season, the soccer team's gonna take priority, there's no doubt about that.
It doubles as a rec field, but a lot of the recreational sports are wanting a football artificial turf line. So the other field will be lined for soccer and for football, and the soccer stadium turf just for soccer. So when the team is not playing soccer in the stadium, it's available for open recreation. The second field is available for intramural and open all the time and is lined for football and soccer. So what we're put in front of you is keeping the soccer stadium where we had it planned and placing the intramural field in one of the football practice fields. And that is actually closer to the residence hall, so the students could use it very easily. And it would allow, as long as we shared, it would allow football to use it during their limited practice times, but then it would be open for intramural and open play. So the downside is, as Regents Marks has mentioned, that you don't have the two fields side by side where you can practice on one and play on the other. The good news is soccer, which is currently favoring grass, would have a grass zone next to the stadium where they could practice shots and run drills on grass turf, and then they'd have the stadium. Football would be able to benefit from the intramural field being next to the football fields. So what I apologize for is it just took me until about midnight last night to realize maybe we don't have to impinge on a very public view of the Sykes House yet. I know it's going to happen. I don't know if I want to do it this way. So I wanted to think of another option. I met with people this morning to see what they thought about it, and I'm just bringing that forward as an option too.
Do we really need a press box for the practice, or excuse me, for the rec field?
No, there shouldn't be a practice box for a rec field.
Well, I
This is
just
for
seen
the
we had-
soccer stadium.
Oh, excuse me.
That's for the soccer stadium.
Okay, but we're saying dual side.
Intramurals sometimes has
Yeah.
that going on. So when I played intramurals here, we
It's
did
hard to
have-
see anything.
Yeah, you had people announce and stuff.
So we would no longer have a dual-sided.
Would lighting still be an issue?
Lighting is going to be much less of an issue now because of the way modern lights are. I'm not real worried about lighting. Yeah, either way, the lighting will be fine.
How many while we have to move the soccer field at all?
We have to move the soccer field because that is an optimal place for expansion, probably a parking garage. And the more work we do, the more obvious it becomes we are going to have to build a parking garage. And that's a perfect place to take residents and have them park there, so you don't have students who commute and faculty and staff coming and going all the time into the parking garage. So it'd be more of a residential parking garage.
But if we did a football stadium and we attached a parking garage to the football stadium, that's where it would go. More than likely.
I think the parking garage will predate any football
Yeah,
stadium,
right.
because I think the need is close to acute for a parking garage, and we'll talk about that more in a bit.
The proximity, Sam, to,
But it would be close, yeah.
right, if you remember where they had the football stadium, that master plan,
Mm-hmm.
if that ever happens, I mean, it's like a half a block. It's just-
Because originally on the master plan, the one image that they'd shown us, I don't know, it was just a mock, but it was attached. It was like where they could build it independent, but then when they went to build it,
That
it
was
would
one
be
option,
attached.
right, that was one option.
But in that area is where we're talking.
Correct.
Exactly.
Correct.
And in
Yeah.
putting the artificial turf there, you could move it, so it would be there for a while,
Right.
but then you could move it in the pecan grove or wherever else you wanted to move it.
Kevin, you got a question?
Yeah, I was trying to figure out in my mind, is where this is that where the football team currently practices?
No, that's where the
What is
soccer
that
team,
used for?
that's where the soccer team works out, practices. They don't play there, but they work out
Where
there.
are you? Oh.
It's right by the
That's right
Wellness
next
Center.
door to the Red Wine Center.
Just to
Just
the red
to
one.
to the east of the Red Wine Center.
And where the football team practices is where you see those two rectangular blocks. That's where the football team practices now.
Where, if the original plan was followed, where would the line be on this map?
It would be, the new fence line would be by the trees closest to the circle.
So that's through here.
Yes.
Where's the rec field on this?
The fence moves.
See where the softball field is?
Mhm.
It's right across the street, back towards you.
It's not on that.
Yeah.
What's your question?
Where on this map is rec field? I'm not,
It's that darker green right in the middle of the page. That,
okay.
that's it.
There's also a map in your book, which is if you want to get perspective of the whole campus, where these things are out.
There it is.
There you go.
So, you're welcome. So this is the current practice field that would be turfed and would now be practice field and open space. And then, I'm not tall enough to show you, but that green space up there by the rec center is the space we're talking about.
And that is not to scale.
No.
That is not to
say.
No, close.
I think this second option favors students more because I know that's a lot more centrally located, and we're excited about getting to use the rec field for students. Right?
You don't have to cross the
You got a
street.
question?
Yeah.
What does this little picture show me here? Is that a huge fence that we would have to build up, or is that just somebody drawing lines to illustrate or something?
They're showing where the new fence would be. So if you look, what you're doing is you're looking right at the Sykes house, and you've got the drive on both sides, and those diagonal lines going up are where the new fence would be, so you can see how much
I don't think it'd be that
would be
tall.
left.
But it's not a
No,
huge.
it wouldn't be that
A little bit like a
It
softball.
wouldn't be, no, it
No.
Landscaping, I think they were trying to show you could create.
Want to make sure.
I'm not making an argument either way, but I fail to see, when I look at this picture, if I pull it over here, I fail to see that you would ever notice the difference from looking through here, because you've got the tree line here anyhow. I'm not arguing for it, and I agree you would have the line coming up, but I fail to see how you would even notice the difference looking at the sign.
It's kind of hard to, not to show you. But it will actually come
Right to here, right. But when you look at the Sykes house, you're seeing this tree line anyhow. You don't see all this anyhow. Well, how would you ever notice the difference?
You'll take out all this vegetation.
Right, but if you planted trees right here, would you ever see it?
You could block it.
You wouldn't 20 years from now.
I'm not arguing for it, I'm just trying to understand it.
You could block it.
You could block it.
Wait a minute, we're taking out 27 giant ones, why couldn't we put those?
Very expensive.
To replant.
Well, they are, but we, okay.
Could.
We could.
We
Okay.
can, we
All right,
can
I
do
was trying to understand, that's all.
anything we want.
All right,
We have
so,
to plant, part of that plan is we would put more trees along that side of Sykes House to create the symmetry.
so I guess I've got a question. If we went with option 2, putting the field in where the existing football, would that be a cheaper option than the option on the table right now? And how much cheaper would it be? Because we wouldn't have to be replanting trees, we wouldn't have to be doing some other things, dual press box, jazz, all that.
The change that I see would be that in that grass field next to the soccer field, if you want that to be irrigated, then that's not in the budget right now.
Well, it's gotta be cheaper than some of the other things that were on that list, though.
Yeah, that's.
So just the grass to put the grass, if you're gonna actually put grass sod in with irrigation, with a well, with reverse osmosis,
It's gonna
that's
cost.
gonna be,
So let me ask this question. If
$100,000.
we went with option 1 and just stuck to the plan, I heard you say earlier that soccer likes grass to practice on. Where are they gonna practice? If all they have is a rec field and their stadium, which I assume is gonna be their practice field now, where are they gonna have an opportunity to practice on grass?
Charlie should probably talk about what soccer,
Step on up to the table.
step on it, Charlie.
They prefer grass.
Yeah,
They prefer to stay where they are,
yeah,
but that's just what they prefer. We're
okay,
trying to do what's best for the university
right.
and what's best for everyone, students, student athletes, teams, the whole. They are accepted, they accept the fact that there's a lot of teams in the conference now that have artificial turf. So there is some preparation that it would help when they go and play in other places. So I think we're really,
6-1 might have dozen others.
it is. That doesn't mean they don't love grass. We've
Look.
got some decisions to make, and we've got to do what's best for everybody.
If you ask anybody that's taken a choice between artificial turf and grass, given the option, given well-maintained fields in both places, natural turf wins every time. I get that, okay, but that's not the reality of today. So,
Especially with our weather.
yeah, well, I think that nationwide that's the case.
Sure.
I mean, I still am surprised at how many college football teams you see on TV that still have natural turf fields. Blows my mind. But that's neither here nor there. Most of them are going to artificial. Okay. All right. We have 2 options in front of us, and I guess from a cost standpoint, it's a push. I don't know what to do here.
Well, I wanted to make this first meeting memorable for you, so.
Okay.
Just whether you feel like you want to.
Based on the cost of either one,
I
would
wanna
it make
start.
any difference if, we're still looking at the stucco on the side of the residential hall? Would that make any difference at all if that could be bricked?
What-
She wants to apply your saving money to the.
Oh.
We are breaking the front of it now. I'm
You
sorry.
are?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
That's moot now.
Oh, she's
Perfect.
gonna sleep.
All right,
in
look,
it.
I'm a little,
I don't care for the encroachment on the Sykes House. I prefer option number 2.
okay. Well,
But I-
here's my personal view, and I kind of agree with you. It's not that we're gonna have to encroach on Sykes House one of these
Yes.
days.
Right.
My point is, I'm not trying to defer it, but based on what you just said, Rebecca, it makes tons of sense. What?
Megan, but yes, it's okay.
Megan?
It was Rebecca.
He's had a long day.
I've been up since 5. The students might see it as a benefit to being in central campus, don't you think?
Absolutely, because we already use those football
Jesse
practice
does.
fields.
Jesse doesn't.
You don't think so? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I feel like it is.
Yeah, this is my opinion about the
You're
option
fine,
one versus option two. Okay, when we initially fitted this fee out, or however presented to the students didn't voted for this fee to be max at 15 hours, which it was not max for every credit hour. And on option one, where you see the two fields side by side, that rec field is mainly for soccer practice, and then student individuals and organizations utilizing that field. If we were to transition this field to the center of campus and have it dual as a soccer practice field and
No.
football practice field,
No.
It's got
It would
nothing
not
to
be
do with
soccer.
soccer.
it's not going to do
No, it
anything
would
with soccer.
not be soccer.
Okay.
Remember what we said here, they're gonna have a grass facility here, and they're gonna practice here, so they would not be practicing in the center of campus, it would be specifically rec.
Football and
Football.
intramurals.
And, yeah.
Football and intramural?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
free
Okay,
play.
because that's my concern, is that if we get too many sports teams practicing on the field, it's just taken away from the student, individuals, and organizations.
You're trading soccer for football is what you're doing, and it still gives you the same amount of time on the field.
Are
Okay,
you
that-
saying there's a
maybe
grass
concern.
associated with a grass
To the-
practice
To the east side of the field.
here?
There's
Yeah.
just a little grass strip left, and if they wanted us to move the fence a little bit there and give them more grass to practice on, having the stadium there leaves them some grass. So what you get is you get one soccer stadium for free play, and then you get a rec field lined for football and soccer for intramurals all the time that football is in practice.
So you're saying in option two, the soccer turf stadium will also be used?
As their
It's
practice
always
facility.
been available for open play.
And it'll be available,
Yes.
again, I don't know how this works, Charlie, but during season, a stadium has to be devoted to the sport, right? But outside of season, if it's turf, it should be available,
For open
Yeah.
play.
yeah.
That's what I've been told.
So let me ask you guys this as students, I mean, and I guess just overall as campus appearance. Originally, when we had talked about the master plan, it was trying to set up, like, I guess a common function between what we did within areas. What we're trying to do now is split it apart. So instead of where we were going to have the rec and soccer and fields and potentially baseball, and it's this big, nice athletic complex across the street was football. It had this nice tie into the university, the campus kind of flow. What we're doing now is we're saying, well, hang on, it's okay to split it back out because we can always move it later on. Is that, I'm not saying no or yes, I'm just saying, like, is that the best option we have? Because originally what I liked about the master plan was when you looked at it, and I'm not Kyle, but I mean, when you looked at it, we said, oh yeah, this will become like a sports complex. We'll have all of our stuff there, it'd be kind of cool. And originally everybody liked it, but now we're saying we're going to move stuff back into this part, we're going to have to move it again. We're going to have to move it again. If we're going to stick with the master plan, or we're saying, hey, the master plan, we got to kind of rework it. It's okay either way. I just think we really need to say that.
Yeah, I think if you'll recall, 2 meetings ago, we actually made that comment that we are gonna have, with Suzanne here, Dr. Shipley here, there's gonna be new ideas that evolve. And we need to give her that opportunity to have that evolve.
So do we do it now?
So that's kind of the question, Sam. I mean, that's kind of why we've opened this can of worms back up. Is because as you look at this, we know we're going to have to encroach on Sykes House eventually. I think the key question here is, do we do it now or do we do it later? Okay? Let me just give you this feedback. When Dr. Shipley and I had the pre-call, we had a pre-call on Tuesday, I asked Dr. Shipley, well, how do you feel about this being so close to Sykes' house? You could tell there was hesitation, and it began to get me to think, and it began to really get my mind going here about that whole concept. Because I would have to say that I was one of the biggest believers in that whole synergy of the center of campus and the complex and the whole 9 yards. But the more I listened to this and the more I thought about it, I started thinking about the central location of this rec field for the time being, and how we could eventually, if we're going to encroach on Sykes' house with a rec field, if we could easily do it 5 years hence. We really could. Because this way, the students get the opportunity to enjoy that right here, right now. And not saying they wouldn't with it being across the street, but that's why it could be fixed later.
I think like Jesse and I were agreeing that this central location would be nice, especially since that $6 fee has already gone into effect for students that are currently here. As long as it remains like prioritized as a rec field, and not that then sports teams would be able to practice on it to where then it turns into the sports teams practicing centrally, taking up student space, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, a couple comments. One, if it ever comes to pass, I think we pretty well resign ourselves to move baseball out there. Number two, if we infringe 100 feet on the Sykes house, Sean, as you said, there are going to be some community members who are going to be unhappy campers.
Well, let me just comment to that. There are going to be unhappy campers whenever we infringe on that space. The question is, look, I'm willing to take on that anytime, anywhere, but the question becomes, does it make sense right now to push for that? There may be better solutions to infringe on it later. I don't know the answer to that question at this time. That's it.
I've heard no downside to, I heard what Nancy mentioned about a common facility. I've heard no downside really to leaving the rec, putting the rec field there. The students seem to be in favor of it. It'll be handier. And, you know, to Sam's comment about combining everything, I mean, it's still combined. There's just a street in the middle of it. But other than that, you got the soccer field, you got the rec center, you got the softball field. They're all still pretty close.
It's a lot closer than a lot of universities, I'll say that,
Yeah.
even now. There's no question.
I personally feel like it's whatever is best for Midwestern in the long run is what we should do now. And I don't know what the answer to that is, because Debbie's going to give me I need to visualize the master plan. I can't see it, so she's going to give me a map so I can look at it.
So let me ask you a question. Go ahead.
No,
Finish your thought.
that's it. I just think that I don't want us to get short-sighted. I want us to look ahead and be forward-thinking and look in the long term what we should be doing. And if there's something we should do now, because it's going to benefit the university in the long run, then I think
I
that's
completely agree with that.
The one comment I would make is if you decide to go with option 2, the placement of the stadium is going to be different than option 1. You can always add the rec field afterwards back over to Sykes' house, but you'll never be able to do it like option 1, where the press box is both sides. So I don't know if
To
that's
me,
a big deal,
I'm
but
indifferent about that.
it's just once you put that soccer stadium down, we're not going to be able to do that.
I get it. I'm indifferent about the dual-sided press box, but let me make a suggestion, because it's beginning to be very clear to me that this conversation we're going to have next could play into kind of where we're headed with all of this. I wish Debbie were here so I could ask this question. So what I'm going to suggest is that we table this until tomorrow, okay? And that we table this so that we might, I love your idea of looking at the original master plan so we can all get in our mind again what was there. That picture speaks 1,000 words. That way we can vote intelligently in the morning after we've had an opportunity to look at it, after we've had an opportunity to hear some additional conversations about other building placements, and that we can think about this in a long-term way.
One other question.
Yes,
Money.
yes.
Is there any way by tomorrow we can have an idea of what the difference would be in the cost between option 1 and option 2?
Sure, we can try to work up some.
Yeah, that'd be great.
It won't be significant.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
We'll have to hear it.
$500,000, but we
Okay,
can
okay,
redo it.
okay, okay. Okay.
Sorry, it's such a big file.
That's okay.
I can't.
No.
May I make a comment?
Sure.
This
I have-
bothers me a great deal, and I tend to agree with what Sam had said. We had a plan, we talked about and worked on for months, we talked about this being here, and we come to the meeting and find out this week, we just now discovered that it infringes on the Sykes House, which bothers me too. I mean, I'm with you on that, I understand that. But to try to come back tomorrow and say, here are the dollars, here's where we're going to move it, if we made this kind of mistake when we spent 6 months on it, I have no idea we're going to make a lot of mistakes trying to vote tomorrow on moving it over here and what's the difference in cost, and I will have no confidence in that. Second thing is, we just heard a presentation about how we don't communicate and things are not open. I really am concerned that we've had this picture for a long time, and now we're going to come back and say, oh, in a Friday meeting, we changed our mind and we voted this way, and the 2 representatives are telling us the students are for it, but I don't really, I mean, I know you represent them, but I'm very concerned about the whole thing and making that kind of decision. Not that I
Fair
disagree
comment.
with anything,
No,
John.
fair comment. It's
I
a very
just
fair
am
comment.
ignorant on what we're doing.
Let me ask a question, Debbie, Kyle. To your point about having a picture of this, I don't think I've ever seen it laid out like this. I mean, I've never, the visualization of the impeding of Sykes House has never been in front of me like this. So I don't think it's fair to say that we've seen this for 6 months. We've known about the idea for 6 months, no question. But as I've looked at this, and the reason it became so real for me is that I had always thought about the stadium being over there, not the rec field. And I'd never really visualized it or tried to put it on a map.
I
So that was my point.
it did not mean that we knew about it. What I meant was that we had had a plan in our mind,
Agreed.
but no one ever came to, I'm saying the same thing you are. I never saw this until today.
Agreed. Understood.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying.
And to your point, Lou, and to Tiffany's point is, I think originally when we saw that, I could be wrong because I'm old and forget stuff, but I thought we lost parking spaces when we did that. And in this move, we're not losing a single parking space. So it seems like what we did was we shifted it over and said, we're not losing any parking, but we're going to cut into Sykes, when originally I don't think that was part of necessarily the way it laid out. I don't know that. So I agree with Tiffany. I'd like to
The soccer
see.
stadiums gave up parking, but I may be wrong too. Again, so
Could I just mention to
Yeah.
that, when we shifted the orientation from east-west, I mean, he modeled this several different ways, and I was not here and don't know what you saw, but soccer does not want to play east-west, and you're correct, if you play east-west, you can move into the parking lot and take up a little less of the Sykes lot.
that must have been
But
what
they
it
do
was.
not want an east-west orientation. They say there's not a single stadium in their conference where they play east-west.
And to that point, I learned on last Saturday that the stadium in Stillwater is the only stadium in the Big 12 that goes east-west.
Turned out pretty good for them.
It sure
That's
did.
football. That's football, not soccer. Yeah,
It's
same thing.
crazy.
Same thing.
Would we consider tabling this to the next board meeting?
So here's my worry with that, Linwood. I don't want to defer getting this thing built, and that's what I worry about, is that I understand your concern, and I'm willing to think about that, but my worry is that that's 3 months, and we're going to delay construction for 3 months. And, what does that do to all of this? I just don't.
Can we take a straw poll of option 1 versus option 2?
I don't think we can do
But
that.
3 months will pale in comparison to a bad mistake.
That I agree with. That is a very fair comment. So,
I do have the board over there, that's the master plan, so. I don't know if
But-
you want to take
But
a-
in terms of, Marilyn, in terms of decision-making, you mentioned to me that you can make a
Do you see what I'm?
a split
Yeah.
decision where you decide to empower us to go forward with selection of an architect, but we don't have to nail down the place yet. If you come back tomorrow and say the cost is virtually the same in either location, she could save the time between now and the next board meeting by going forward with the contract and coming back to us in February to confirm the location. Is that not true?
The architect is probably gonna wanna know where to put it because of utilities and that kind of thing. I mean, they can go ahead and do more of option 1, option 2.
Right.
Is that what you're thinking? Okay. They could
Yes,
do
I
that.
should come to this meeting.
I-
And
I have
if you
to-
all remember, when we saw this, remember it was they kept flying into the air and all
You
the
could
new,
walk.
the buildings all of a
Mustang
sudden were
walk.
there. So by the end, Sykes House was
Down to the very bottom,
Can't even see
there it is, right there.
it was
Completely
yeah,
with
it
three
was
inch high
totally
soccer field.
surrounded. And the board didn't approve all of that. You all looked at it, we talked about it,
Conceptualized.
the conceptual idea of it. So this is what you saw was field, tennis courts, so that there could be a stadium. So we never had that conversation about how close is that to Sykes House, because it was still very conceptual.
Right, up above, right where your thumb
Yeah,
is. There,
yeah.
That's like the perfect little.
Oh,
Yeah,
layout.
that's
yeah,
it.
this is it, better than that, okay.
Yeah. That's it,
So
and it's
this
very
is-
clear.
So, yeah, so what we're
Yeah.
talking about is
You remember
option
some.
1 is you're not gonna do 2 big fields like that. You're only gonna do 1 big soccer field, then you do like a smaller football field. So it's not gonna go quite over as far as it's showing in this picture. Because we're gonna make that one smaller.
Okay.
You all never had that part of the conversation, so.
All right, well, but that's hugely helpful, and so let me ask a question of the administration and, the athletic director and the students at this point. So to Dr. Gibbons' comment about tabling it for 3 months, okay, for our next board meeting, so that we can make sure we get this right. How do you guys feel about that?
I mean, I feel like more input is always better. I don't know how that helps us on time constraints, but in the SGA meetings I attended, I don't ever remember being presented that X is where our artificial turf is going to go.
Right.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I just know that the students all around really wanted that artificial turf and wanted to be sure that their $6 was going to a field not to be utilized by sports,
And
but by
so do we.
students.
Kyle, let
So
me ask
I
you-
don't think that the students would have any difference, or they wouldn't know any difference because they just know that they're getting a field.
Kyle, let me ask you a question. If we defer this, table whatever, from a construction standpoint, what does that do to you?
It's gonna delay, obviously. Trying to construct it during the winter time tends to be more problematic.
Well, but so it's November, if we approve this today, you're gonna be building in the winter. If we table it until February and approve it, you'll be building in the spring.
Sure, if we could get it through, we've got to go through the design process. The possibility we could put in the field itself so that it would be available for use next fall. I don't know that we would have the structures erected by then for kids to play on it.
One thing we are doing though is we've proceeded with the contract for the softball turf
Yeah.
and the financing for that. So that is gonna happen within the next few months.
And that'll be open to student play because it'll be artificial.
Right. Dr. Shipley?
I
Oh,
got
yeah,
one quick point. I'm agreeing that we should table it because if I'm correct with your comments you made earlier, that parking garage, we're gonna look at that parking garage pretty quick. That's
Yeah,
where
I agree.
the rec field's gonna be, so we're gonna have to move it.
No. That's
not
where
right.
the old soccer stadium is.
That's what they'll say.
Okay, where's the proposed
Rec field.
rec field? It's right there.
No, it's in the middle of the page, the dark green.
There is gonna be a delay of getting the garage done, because we won't be able to move
Correct.
soccer off that
Parking
site.
garage.
So it's the
You put the
domino.
parking garage right there and leave the field alone.
Okay.
No, this comes down, this is the soccer
It's
spot.
3 months, I mean,
Okay.
it's not like a year.
Current soccer stadium.
Correct,
Comes
correct,
down.
correct.
Compromise,
Yeah,
we
but
could
if we're
go
moving that
forward
across
with
the street,
something for,
That's
like
across the
she's
street,
talking about,
this is
without
the new field, but it's
postponing the
not
whole
where the.
decision.
No,
Well,
It's not.
so that's what I was getting ready to ask, is, so we know we're gonna build something next
It's
to
okay, it's continuing.
Redwine. Can we at least start that process and understanding what it's gonna do, so that we don't, so that all we're tabling is where do we put the rec field? And getting that done.
So the way you would do that is you would flip the plan, and the way they had it originally, you put the soccer stadium next to Red Wine. You flipped it and put the soccer stadium next to the house. You flip it, and so your intramural field, if you choose to build it, will go where the green space is. And it's that simple.
And
That's all you do.
the one reason we did put the soccer stadium closer to the house,
I
because we
know.
thought it would be quieter.
Yeah, I know. Well, it doesn't really matter.
The other ones, the kids will be playing on, so just
Right, doesn't matter.
We'll buy earplugs.
Yeah, it's okay.
So the only thing that would be left questionable is where to put the rec center, the rec field.
Right,
The
the
rec field.
question would be, you approve the soccer stadium.
Yes.
You approve the rec field, you have one of two locations for the rec field that you decide in February. It
And then we
goes
decide
next
in
to the
February,
soccer stadium, or it goes
Good
next
compromise.
to the
So
football.
one thing I want everybody to know is, once we decide on where the stadium goes, we have to run infrastructure and lights and stuff, so it's not gonna be, okay, put the rec field down and then you can put the stadium someplace else. We have to run all that before we put the field down. So once we do that, it's kind of we can't come back and redecide to put the stadium someplace else easily.
And to that point, I think I really agree with Linwood and Tiffany in the fact that we have to look at least at the plan, because they looked at all those things. They looked at utility lines. They looked at it wasn't just, I don't think, an arbitrary 1, 2, 3. I think when they looked at it, they said, this is why we're doing it, based on the lines that you can run all the pipe, run all the utilities. And I just get concerned, to Linwood's point, that, Sean, we're gonna say, pull the trigger on this and just flip it, and it's gonna.
Well, but Sam, I think the point that Marilyn's making is this is not, we're not suggesting that we're changing proximity, we're changing exact location. That's the deal. I mean, all those utility lines are still available, still there, because we're not changing proximity. It's still going in that spot. It may go 50 feet this way instead of 50 feet. And I think what Marilyn's trying to point out is that we gotta decide exactly where
Where
we
you
want
want the
that stadium.
Because once.
It's not a
we're
proximity
gonna
question,
run
it's
this
an exact
line.
location.
Well, that's what I'm saying, though. I mean, like, when we looked at that whole map, even just off the conceptual map that we were doing, it seemed like they looked at all those things, because I remember him standing there saying, like, we do this, and we will have, like, utility corridors that will go all the way down, and so when you upgrade your HVAC and blah, 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 and am I wrong, Kyle?
No, that was right. The Mustang Walk, the idea was to have utilities underneath that.
Yeah. And that would still be true. This wouldn't change anything related to that.
Right, and honestly, I'm not so sure it's a great idea to go directly underneath it, because when you put new utilities down there, you gotta tear it up. It's expensive, so it's just street.
Well, instead of waiting 3 months, can we call a board meeting next month and decide? I mean, 1 month will be enough to have all the facts, right?
We could do it by phone.
Yeah,
We definitely could
yeah,
do that.
yeah.
Look, here's what I'm gonna recommend, okay? If Dr. Shipley, if you're okay with this, is that we, approve the stadium and the rec field, okay? And that we allow the administration to spend another 30 days on this, and we'll have a called meeting in 30 days, and we'll hear what the suggestion is, and we'll approve it from there. But I think if we're gonna send the right message to the campus, to Linwood's point, we cannot sit here and vacillate about these things that we've already seen and already agreed to. And Sam is right on this, from the standpoint of this whole concept the general concept is still valid and should be validated going forward. And if this is about impeding on Sykes House, we need to set that aside. We need to decide what's best for the university, and Tiffany's comment is exactly right. What's good for the university today is good for the university long term. Okay?
Could I
So,
make one personal comment
you
though?
bet.
All of this was held from my arrival, and so if you want the master plan to be absolutely carved in stone, I think the board needs to talk about that probably when we have our retreat, because I was told to reimagine this. And I arrive, and the first thing I do is I completely change a long-held tradition of the Sykes House. So it would have been easier to have it done before I got here. So you held a lot of these decisions for me to be here. I'm giving input. I'm just saying I need your input at the retreat. What does this master plan mean? Is it flexible, or is it really our marching orders for the future? Because I will make decisions differently based on that. I've worked with facilities master plans that are an indication of a plan that can be flexible, that gives you new information, but you still move things around like dominoes. So we'll talk about that when we have the retreat.
Let me address that, because I think that's a great point. Because I was one of those pounding the table saying, you need to rethink this stuff, be strategic. As I look at this secondary plan that's presented, it doesn't change the master plan viability, in my opinion, okay? It changes the location of a recreational field to be more accommodating so that we may or may not change plans and move those dominoes down the road. It doesn't change the proximity of that soccer stadium. It does not change the plan of building a parking garage. It doesn't change any of that. It just changes the proximity of the recreational field. In fact, to a more viable location on the inside of campus. I could easily make an argument to maintain the plan, because I actually fell in love with that picture that's on the top of that. But I also think it's important for us as board members to listen to where we're headed and why we're headed there. So with that said, I still think the recommendation needs to be that we approve both of these as presented and table the idea of location, proximity for the rec field until the administration's had an opportunity to discuss it further, and then we'll have a meeting in 30 days. Is 30 days long enough, Suzanne?
Mm-hmm.
Will the building of the soccer field begin within that 30-day period?
Oh, no.
No,
Oh, heavens,
not at all.
no. We're not that fast.
What it does, it gives them the opportunity to begin to let contracts and begin to seek bids and all of that. It begins to start the ball roll. That's all it does. The construction will get started.
And the architect, if you let us proceed with the contract on the architect, they can at least design, I'm hoping, the buildings and the bleachers, and that will go wherever you want it. If you want to do plan one, it can go there, or plan two, it can go there.
Sure, and they can look at the spaces that are available and say, here's how it changes
So
the look.
We can do some preliminary planning that way.
Well, I'm just like Sam, I always look at a football stadium there as my end goal. But, because I think that's a central thing I personally would like to see us do. And so that's a target spot for me. And everything, I'm just telling you my bias, everything I'm thinking about is that going to prevent us from really putting the football stadium?
So you heard this comment made earlier. One of the things that I asked Dr. Shipley when we were talking about this is, can you roll up that field and move it?
Yes, you can.
And the answer is you can. If we put that rec field down right there, you can roll it up and move it. It's ours. We own it. We can put it wherever we want.
That turf may be worn out by them anyway. They only last 10 years max.
Well, we're gonna hope to get that football stadium at 5. We'll see.
In 5 years, the turf field is already appreciated a lot.
All right. So how do we go about that, Debbie? That is, you changed the.
So the motion right now had 6 pieces.
Okay.
Construct a basketball court, place artificial turf on the current softball field. The third one was build a new soccer complex on the south campus with 2 artificial fields. So that would be changed to with 1, with a second artificial turf field location to be determined.
To be determined, okay.
Then the other three, the contract for the turf on softball, approving a contract to build the soccer complex, and the financing plan all stay the same.
Okay, all right.
So,
And I'd like somehow you to weave in the 30-day.
and the 30-day.
30-day. Okay, so that is the motion. Here is the master plan.
Oh
So-
my gosh.
Oh, good Lord. Okay.
I'm a visual learner.
I just need that one page.
That's all I need to.
So we have a motion on the table.
I need
I
to
need a
know,
second.
who, did you make the motion?
What was the motion again?
Um,
Sam was distracted.
It's
Okay.
all the same except for the rec field location is to be determined.
Yeah, that's fine.
Through a
I'm not
special
sure.
motion in the 30 days.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Second. All in favor?
Uh,
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for that hearty discussion.
Here comes another one.
Here comes another one.
You want to talk about this one? Okay, so item 1610 is tuition revenue bond project. The board approved MSU's request to the legislature for capital construction funding in the amount of $73 million in 2014. And the project was authorized through the legislative process in the amount of $58.4 million. Since Dr. Shipley's arrival on campus, she has worked with the administration and the campus representatives to develop a plan that will address the campus needs outlined in the funding request. A copy of the administration's recommendation was sent to you yesterday and is in your folder. Dr. Shipley, please walk us through the work that has been done and your recommended action at this time, please.
Okay, if everyone wants to turn to attachment 1610, that's the best way to walk through this. Let me give you a little bit of history. When I came, I wanted to take a little bit of time to gather the academic side of the house. It's such a tremendous opportunity that the state of Texas is giving us to build a new building. There are very few states investing in higher ed to the extent that Texas is doing this right now. This is an opportunity not to be taken lightly. So I wanted to make sure that we talked about what programming choices we had and what would go in what buildings based upon the funds available. So I brought in an architect who had done a master plan for me at another campus and 2 buildings, somebody I really trusted who I knew how to dialogue with people, and his degree is from Texas Tech, so he has been in Texas a lot. He's built buildings at Tech. He built the new student union at Tech.
Hey.
And so
Sam.
he's trustworthy. And he did a really great job of holding several days of discussions with faculty and staff and deans to say, here are your choices. And he came up with 3 options, and we like option 1, which you see before you, which is to build a new building for health science and human services for the Gun College, to then have the wonderful opportunity of an entirely empty building to reimagine and start over what programming makes sense there, and then to have funds left over to update Moffett with some plans you may have already seen that have been out there for a while that are great plans to make Moffett a first-class library with a little bit of fire safety for Hardin and Bolin. And he said your number 1 priority, even though we're building a health and human services building, is you've got to take care of information technology. They cannot stay in Memorial Hall. So information technology figures into this, and the Fane Fine Arts Center has some fire code issues to address also. So this is the recommendation that he brought forward. You can see, and that we thought was the best recommendation. You can see on the map where the master plan had the building next to Prothro Jaeger. The square footage of the building would cause it to probably no longer be an L shape, but a rectangular shape, and it could face Prothro Jaeger and be and develop a quad. But there are other pieces of the master plan that show academic buildings elsewhere on campus. You could have it next to Bridwell. You could have it behind McCoy Engineering. And so similar to what we talked about with the athletic fields, what we'd really like to be able to do is move forward with the approval of the building and the and the renovation programming as described without tying our hands to it absolutely has to be at this place. So this is something we want to bring Doug back because the dominoes fall through so many buildings. We want to make sure we put in Bridwell what we want in Bridwell, that we place the Health and Human Services building in the best possible spot, and that we just have very complex programming to still talk about, and I've been here 90 days. So our recommendation is, we had a choice. Do we build an attachment or a freestanding building? We really need the freestanding building. That's what the legislature approved. So we would ask to proceed with planning to put out RFPs, begin the selection of architects, and think then again about how we use vacated space and come back with the location and precise budget as a recommendation in February.
Could I have a motion to approve this recommendation as presented?
Yeah, I'll make the motion.
Second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion on this matter? I presume we have some. I will remind the board that when we did the long-range plan to kind of dovetail on the conversation we had about the athletic fields, this was one of the most portable things we talked about. Do we put it here? 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 Do we add on freestanding? So to be clear, what Dr. Shipley is pointing out to us is very much similar to what the master planners explained to us. Megan, you had a question or comment.
Comments, yes. I really appreciate seeing the renovation of the library. I know that's something that a lot of students are really wanting. I'm so excited to see that there. But then also I just am concerned with moving the relocation of Bridwell to February. Does that also postpone the priority of the tutoring center? Because I know that that is a huge thing that student government is involved with right now, and the tutoring center is something that a lot of students really want. So I'm just concerned with the priority.
That's why, what's so exciting about this opportunity, that it's really marvelous that we can do this, is that, as you're pointing out, the space you vacate is just as important as the space you vacate and renovate is as important as the new space you build. So we're beginning to imagine Bridwell as a one-stop shop for student services that really put students at the core of what we do in a new way. So the tutoring, lots of academic services being in Bridwell. The question is, what else is in Bridwell? What happens to Memorial? Those are very important things, and we want to make sure we get it right, and we want to bring Doug Moss back to talk programming to make sure that things happen. So an example is with IT leaving Memorial, we have lots of options for that. It could become an international student area where we put all of our international programming instead of spreading it all over campus, or it could be something we use for testing or something else. I mean, every time you begin to vacate one building, you have to think about what goes in that building when you know where your academic success center ends up. So you're right. That's what we're hoping for Bridwell, is a very strong academic student success area.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that the tutoring center was a high priority, because I know that that's something that I think and that other students think should be considered a high priority.
Thank you.
One other thing I will point out, and I pointed this out to Dr. Shipley the other day, I think that this concept gives us more bang for the buck than other concepts have in the past, and I'm really excited about the opportunity to do all of these things. Kyle, I'm sure you're excited about doing all of these things. So I just think it really is illustrative of, I think, the things that Dr. Shipley pointed out earlier. She's been here 90 days and with the administration has had the opportunity to rethink some things that are really positive, I think, for this campus. So again, I'll leave it at that. Any other comments or questions? Any other discussion? We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. That concludes the business to come before this committee at this time. Why don't we take a quick break It's been, yes, 3:40. Let's try to be back here if we could, by 10 minutes till the hour.
Thank you.